Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 1. Now, during a speech in the northwest of England earlier today, Sir Keir Starmer attacked what he calls Reform Party's fantasy economics, warning that the party's proposed policies will lead to a Liz Truss-style economic meltdown.
And that's the question you have to ask about Nigel Farage. Can you trust him? Can you trust him with your future? Can you trust him with your jobs? Can you trust him with your mortgages, your pensions, your bills? And he gave the answer on Tuesday, a resounding no. He set out economic plans that contained billions upon billions of completely unfunded spending. Precisely the sort of irresponsible splurge that sent your mortgage cost, your bills, and the cost of living through the roof. It's Liz Truss all over again.
Well, there you go. A whole press conference dedicated to the threat of reform and why you shouldn't vote for Nigel Farage. Of course, this all comes just days after Nigel Farage promised to reverse Labour's cuts to the winter fuel allowance and also scrap the two-child benefit cap. But he's faced questions on how he'd fund those policies. Well, let's go to the northwest of England now. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, was in the room, questioned the Prime Minister alongside a fairly feisty press pack. Christopher Hope, what was your main takeaway?
Hi Tom, hi Emily. Yeah, welcome to Warrington. Moments ago, of course, we're in St Helens. This is the red wall. These are seats which Labour have to win to hang on to the size of majority they've got in Parliament at the next election. Now, why is the PM doing this? He's a busy man. His time is limited. Why is he taking on Reform UK and Nigel Farage so volubly in a press conference? There's no general election for 4 years. There's a local elections next year, elections in Scotland and Wales. The local elections, of course, in the Runcorn Helmsley by-election was well over a month ago. It's because he's worried about the polling. Now, the Labour Party think there's a chance of getting stuck into Reform UK after that speech we carried by Reform UK on Tuesday, when we heard those plans, those spending plans announced by Nigel Farage. 40 billion saved from net zero, lifting the level at which you pay income tax to £20,000 a year. That could cost 50 to 80 billion pounds a year, according to the IFS. So they think they've got a chance here to paint Nigel Farage as Liz Truss on steroids. He called him, didn't he? They called Nigel Farage Liz Truss 2.0, Trussonomics. That's been used by the Lib Dem party. But I want to ask him why on earth he's doing this. Is it the case that Nigel Farage is living rent-free in your head, Prime Minister? And here's what he told us.
Chris Hope, Chris.
Chris Hope, GBNews. Prime Minister, Nigel Farage has 5 MPs. You've got 403. Are you panicking because Reform is so far ahead in the polls, it seems? Is he living rent-free in your brain? You went to a state school. Your dad worked in a factory. Your mum worked in the NHS. So why has a public school-educated former city trader got more in common with the Red Wall than you have?
Well, I've set out my divide. I think the single most important thing is to make sure we stabilise our economy and build on that strong foundation the future of our country. And that is what we're doing. And we're seeing the early signs of that. Growth is up, the highest in the G7 this year. Interest rates have come down 4 times. So we're beginning to show what happens when you stabilise the economy. And I want to protect working people from Nigel Farage, because I want to protect them from what he will do, which is exactly the same as Liz Truss, which will have a direct impact on their lives. And in relation to the second part of your question, I don't need lectures from Nigel Farage on what it means to be working people. I know what it means to work 10 hours a day in a factory 5 days a week. And I know that because that is what my dad did every single working day of his life. And that's what I grew up with. So I don't need lessons from Nigel Farage about the issues that matter most to working people in this country. Thank you, Chris.
There we have Sir Keir Starmer answering a question from me earlier here in the northwest. Now, Nigel Farage is apparently in Las Vegas, where he's at a crypto conference. He has said this in the past few moments: the Prime Minister is resorting to dirty tricks borrowed from the 2016 referendum campaign to attack me. This is Project Fear 2.0. That goes back, of course, to the attacks the Tory party did against Nigel Farage in that referendum. And Zia Yusuf, the party chairman, he told reporters what an extraordinary press conference. He said it's obviously panic stations at Labour. Keir Starmer is panicking, Reform UK, Zia Yusuf says, because his awful government is now trailing Reform by a staggering 8 points in the latest YouGov poll. And that, I think, is the risk of what's happened here. So Keir Starmer is now taking on Nigel Farage as apparently the real opposition to his party, lifting up a party with just 5 MPs against one with 403 MPs. The arithmetic in Parliament is stacked way against Reform UK. It's barely the 5th biggest grouping in Parliament. So why is Labour doing this? It does look like they are panicking or worrying about the polls and hence the attacks on Nigel Farage, but it simply lifts him up as an equal of the Prime Minister when he, in fact, looking at the numbers in Parliament, he's a tiny pimple on the backside of an enormous majority of a Labour Party.
I think you're right on that. It all feels a little premature, Chris. Thank you very much indeed for your time, as always. Christopher Hope there, our political editor.
I can notice a taxi behind Christopher Hope there. And I know
is that his taxi?
I know there's been some trouble with the journalists trying to get to the location. The trains have all been a nightmare.
How many journalists does it take to get to?
I wonder if he has to just jump into that taxi and run.
Oh, well, maybe. He's always dashing around.
So, Godspeed, Chopper, Godspeed.
Godspeed, Chopper. Should we see what Reform UK's chairman, Zia Yusuf, had to say, reacting to Keir Starmer's speech there?
What an extraordinary press conference. It's obviously panic stations at Labour. Look, Keir Starmer is panicking because his awful government is now trailing Reform by a staggering 8 points in the latest YouGov poll. And we talk about economic credibility. This government, in their manifesto last June, they promised £10 billion of increased spending. In their actual budget, their first budget 3 months later, they increased spending by £60 billion and on their magic money tree found another £30 billion to give away sovereign territory in the form of Chagos Island. So what we see time and again for decades in this country, when it comes to foreign citizens, when it comes to splurging money like a drunken sailor on things that add no value to British people's lives, there's infinite money, whether it's free accommodation for illegal migrants, whether it's the net zero religion, whether it's the ridiculous endless obsession with foreign aid. The fact is, when it comes to British people, we're always told by the two old parties there's no money left. When Nigel's the Prime Minister, that changes and the interests of the British people will come first.
Well, you can hear more from Zia Yusuf on Martin Daubney's show a little later this afternoon, so do stay tuned for that. But the questions that came from the press pack, as you call them, I mean, they were all along similar lines. I mean, first, it's worth noting that Keir Starmer would not give an answer on the 2-child benefit cap. He would not go there. Just ignored it, obfuscated, just didn't answer the question, frankly. But it was all about you're running scared of reform. Why are you holding a press conference 4 years out from a general election about one party? Is Nigel Farage now your main opponent? Are you living rent-free?
Yes. What was the other one? Nigel Farage talks like a human being. Why can't you? And that was from The Guardian.
He literally just presented himself for a beating by the looks of things. Anyway, that's my assessment. Should we see what David Maddox has to say? He's the political editor at The Independent. David, what's your assessment of what you heard there? I mean, I'm not sure this was the best move from Sir Keir Starmer. What do you think?
I thought it was absolutely extraordinary, actually. Not what he said or, it didn't really matter what he said. It was just a fact that it happened at all. I mean, as Chris was just saying there, this is a party, Reform is a party with just 5 MPs. We're less than a year out from the last election. We're 4 years away from the next general election. We're a year away from any kind of national election at all. And he's already shown he's completely panicking about reform. I mean, there were two interesting takeaways for me as well beyond that, is that it seems to confirm, at least in Starmer's mind, that the Conservative Party is finished and that he now needs to focus on reform. And that, a lot of people have been saying that. I doubt Kemi Badenoch would agree with that assessment, but that's clearly what Starmer's thinking now.
But David, should he be focusing on any opposition party only 10 months into his premiership?
No.
It seems awfully defensive. If it was the Tories, if it was the SNP, if it was the Reform Party, it all seems, I don't know, it just seems weak.
No, it shouldn't be, actually, and it is weak. I mean, the issue is that he's coming under pressure from within his own party. I wrote about this last weekend. There are talks about leadership pushes and things like that. People are unhappy with what they're doing. This is why he'll almost certainly reverse his position on two-child benefit and winter fuel. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a complete reversal on winter fuel. He's got real problems in his own party. And, this was very hastily arranged. We got a late notice about this press conference last night. I think it just shows that he's in trouble. But I think the most important thing here is he's just confirmed that Nigel Farage can be Prime Minister. And, the whole message on Tuesday from Farage was vote reform, get reform. Well, Starmer's basically just agreed with him, which has completely closed the credibility gap for reform. And, it's just handed Farage a massive boost.
But is that potentially what Keir Starmer wants? I mean, for all we're saying, well, what if this bigs up Nigel Farage? What if the Prime Minister wants to big up Nigel Farage? Frankly, to destroy the Conservative Party, which obviously have over 100 seats in Parliament compared to Nigel Farage's 5. If the Prime Minister can do his best to continue this infighting on the right and to have Reform go at the Conservative seats, the Conservatives will still go at the seats that Reform are targeting, does he think that if he creates this sort of right-wing civil war and foments it and plugs those bellows to push up that fire, does he think he can benefit from that, sliding through the middle of all of these contests?
I think that was true a year ago. I think it's a massive, massive risk. Now, I don't think that there'll be two centre-right parties standing at the next election. There'll be one which is effectively can win and the other will be finished. We'll wait and see to see which that is. But it's, I think it's a hugely risky strategy. I mean, the Red Wall MPs, now Labour MPs, of course, in the Red Wall, in the Midlands and the North, don't agree with that assessment at all. They're all terrified about losing their seats to Reform, and they've got very good reason to. I mean, let's just look at what happened in County Durham in the county council election there. The Labour council absolutely swept aside by Reform, and this is going to get repeated up and down the country. Let's look at Wales next year. We had the John Swinney article in the Daily Record today suggesting that it's a straight fight in Scotland between Reform and the SNP. These are remarkable times.
Yeah, that would be incredible. David Maddox, thank you very much. Political editor at the Independent newspaper.
And yet I think what John Swinney is doing in Scotland is exactly what Keir Starmer is trying to do in England.
I think you're giving him too much credit.
He thinks he's got an advantage for saying, it's me or Nigel Farage, because he thinks Nigel Farage has worse favourability than he does in Scotland.
4 years out for an election.
11 months out from the Scottish parliamentary elections and the Welsh Assembly or the Senate elections.
I don't know. I think it's a bit embarrassing. KC says Tom Starmer is not that clever.
I don't know. There are some very clever people in Downing Street.
I don't know. Haven't been very clever so far.
And of course, let's not forget, it's not Keir Starmer who writes the words that comes out of the mouth of Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer sits at the front of the Dockland Lights railway train.
I mean, he didn't come up with Island of Strangers himself, Tom.
No, someone else wrote that for him. I don't want to break that for you now, but
I can't imagine he enjoyed saying that.
It didn't help Nigel Farage that at the time that the Prime Minister was saying that he'd act like he was in some sort of casino. Nigel Farage is actually in some sort of casino. He's speaking at a conference in Las Vegas, which perhaps is why the Prime Minister chose this precise moment to make these sort of tortured analogies.
If Keir Starmer had a stronger personality, let's say, that line would have been delivered with
panache.
Gusto. But it fell a little flat, perhaps. But it was probably the best line in that speech. Nick says, Tom, this is all about a challenge to Starmer's leadership. He's massively panicking, trying to head it off. Yes, Tom thinks that this might be part of a clever strategy to pit Keir Starmer as the personality against Nigel Farage, because Nigel Farage is like Marmite, isn't he? Although I would argue that Keir Starmer is like a Brussels sprout.
Yes, but this is the strategy that the Labour Party has taken recently. Which, and even in the last election, which is, a Brussels sprout is less offensive to perhaps Green Party voters. So whilst Nigel Farage has higher favourability, he also has higher unfavourability. So whilst YouGov has found that Reform is 8 points ahead of Labour in the polls, when YouGov, that same polling company, asks people on a head-to-head, who would you rather Prime Minister, Nigel Farage gets the same number that Reform gets, but Keir Starmer, on a head-to-head, Keir Starmer versus Farage, he starts to add in those other party votes. He gets a bunch of Lib Dems, he gets a bunch of Greens, and actually has a 15-point lead ahead of Nigel Farage in that head-to-head YouGov question. Despite the Reform Party being well ahead of the Labour Party, if he can frame the question as it's Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage, he thinks that's his best chance of winning.
Maybe. I think you're overthinking it. I think he's just on Struggle Street. I'm absolutely not saying he's not on Struggle Street, and I'm sure that Keir Starmer would wish to be doing absolutely anything other than talking up the chances of Nigel Farage as Prime Minister. But I think he's closed off just about every other option of winning the next election, and he thinks this is his last chance to lose. I'd agree with you if we were, say, a few months out from a general election. It just all seems rather premature at this stage. I think it might be the wrong thing.
Well, we remember that, the general election isn't the only election that's going to happen over the course of the next 4 years. In 11 months, Scotland and Wales go to the polls for those parliaments.
Yeah, true.
And some polls have said that Reform is first place in Wales. Could there be a Reform Party First Minister of Wales? I mean, that would be an embarrassment for the government.
Well, they were big Brexit voters, weren't they?
They were, and
Welsh.
Ever since the Welsh Assembly was established, back in 1999, I think, the First Minister has always been Labour. There's been anything other than Labour in Wales. So this would be the first time breaking that if those polls are borne out.
So, yeah, Nigel Farage is in Las Vegas. Why not? Hey, at 10 o'clock tonight, apparently he's delivering a speech to a Bitcoin conference. I mean, what do you make of that?
Takes
Interested at all? Perhaps he's trying to drum up some cash for the party, I don't know.
But I'm